Here we go. Hi, I'm Bob.
Hi, I'm Nikki.
Together we're shifting norms, and we believe in growing, thriving, and challenging the status quo. And we've been working with leadership development for over 30 years and are super excited to bring some information to you in hopes that you can learn something from it and put some stuff into practice with the teams that you work with.
We've been working with youth workers and leaders, and actually both of us have been managers as well in youth programs. And we've, like, in our conversations with each other and other people, we've really sort of stumbled on this thing as a problem that people have, this hiring and firing cycle where people come and they work with us, and then you sort of train them up, and then all of a sudden they're off somewhere. Or you've got one or two staff that you just can't get motivated. And so what we've done is we've tried to put that all together into a large picture that we've broken down for you. And we got these three different sections that we've been trying to look at. So the first one is like leading with responsibility. And so one of the things I think, Bobby, you and I both have talked about is that, like, we have to take some responsibility ourselves as the leaders to sort of understand who we are and what our roles are.
Yeah, and I think too, responsibility, I don't remember who it was, but some brilliant person who likes to play with words as much as I do broke the word down, and so it's the ability to respond. So when you think about leading with response ability, it's a little bit different than just it's my job to be your leader. And so that involves so many things, taking care of ourselves and being able to actually respond in a way that makes sense for whatever our purpose is to work together or whatever outcomes we're trying to get, rather than just getting stuck in this kind of power play of doing what I say because I'm the supervisor, or doing what I say because isn't it obvious this is supposed to get done. And so really the idea of leading with responsibility has a lot underneath it.
It's so funny you talk about that, because I remember one of my first managers when I came from England to the United States sort of talked to me about like learning to respond to things rather than react to things.
Yeah.
And I think so often, like especially as a new manager, I know for me, I spent a lot of time like reacting to things because I was so worried about this new position I was in. So I think what I want to break down is like these, like you said, that if you understand who you are and what your role is, that you can sort of then help your staff do that for themselves as well.
Yeah. And another thing, just in thinking about leading teams and leading the teams that we work with, when we're trying to get a team that works really well together, that can get some jobs done pretty effectively and efficiently, there's being able to lead those teams with responsibility, but also being able to lead through effective change. So a lot of times in a lot of the leaders that I work with have either been the person that has to instigate the change. It seems right now a lot of the leaders that I'm working with throughout the States and in Canada are leading through change that they are not the ones who initiated it. So a change happens to the organization, or the change comes down because some kind of funding stream has shifted, or just priorities have shifted, or an emergency happens. Whatever it happens, we have a lot of managers and leaders who have to lead their staff through this change in a way that is effective. So oftentimes when change happens, transitions happen, right? And sometimes transitions, I don't know, it's hard to say which one comes first, but a lot of the hiring and firing cycle starts happening because we have to figure out how are we going to lead through this effective change that makes sense for our teams, it makes sense for us, and makes sense for our clients or our participants.
Yes, when you're talking about like leading through change that's imposed on you, it's sort of funny because I have reached out to some people that I used to supervise probably 15 years ago who are now supervisors themselves, and one of them wrote something about she knew that like bad news might be coming because I would always feed everybody. So, which at first I was like, oh, it's just a food thing that I did. But when I think about it, it was because I sort of wanted to make sure that we sort of actually breaking bread and talking together about what was coming up was an opportunity for us to have the sort of conversation about what was happening and why it was happening without it being like, just do it because I told you. Yeah. And so I think this building relationship and maybe like, having food is part of that family and creating a family or a community that you can talk to each other and be honest about what's like scary about that. because sometimes it's about what does that mean for me now? Now I've got to do something new.
Yeah, I think too. Just for leaders, it's hard to know like what does the framework of the conversation need to be,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're really thinking about how do I set this up? Do I need the whole team together? Do I need to have food? Is this going to be just another staff meeting, or is this going to be
Right.
something where we're actually creating plans to move through some change together?
I
So
think yeah.
go ahead.
I was just thinking about that, like having also, so giving yourself permission that maybe we're going to take a little more time so that we don't have to spend more time later.
Yeah.
And so, like, maybe it's that our staff meeting is a little longer than it's going to be normally because we got some things to attend to.
Yeah, and as a leader, being able to find the best or a better resource or a better way to frame conversations, knowing when kind of your style needs a shift, right? So I know that I have some core behaviors or some core skills that just they kind of rise to the top, or they show up in certain situations. And so like you have a staff member who says, yeah, I always knew something was up because you were going to bring food, and 15 years later you're like, So being able to like think about what are some other frameworks that people have had to help move conversations to meet the needs of our staff. And so Nikki and I have really put together a set of different strategies for each of these kind of core areas. So one core area being leading with responsibility, another core area being leading effective change, and another core area being leading through some of those changes and transitions. And so we just want to give you a couple of strategies to align with leading with responsibility. And as we kind of share these strategies with you, just think about what does this currently look like in your role as a leader?
Okay,
you want to go through those, Nikki?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
So, sorry, what the first thing is like understanding your role, and so sort of it's some time for you to think about what do you currently do, how do you operate as a leader, what are your responsibilities, what's your role, not to just the outcomes, but like the people that you work with. And then the next one is like knowing and growing your own strengths, and I think you spoke to that a little bit just a moment ago about like how do you know what it is that you need to grow too, like where do you get that feedback, who keeps you accountable, rather than just sort of waiting 15 years to hear from somebody about what you may have done a little bit better when you were actually managing them. And I think the big thing is like this building community is having a team where people know each other beyond like I turn up as the part-time person who's come in to teach art on Wednesdays, but they're actually part of a team that's part of a larger picture working together. And then I think there's... You're fine, sorry, Bob.
I want to add to your building community piece a little bit, because I think, too, oftentimes leaders and managers, and I know I do this really well in the beginning. My background was in, like being a camp counselor. That's where I really kind of started on seeing the bigger picture of the role our staff can play. And so I think as leaders, we often will get our whole team. So at the beginning of program, you might have a bunch of new hires, and so you do, like, if you have a dream situation, you might have a week of orientation, or you have some time with the team to really develop that. But then people don't tend to make time to continue that team building throughout the year or throughout the project together. So we do a lot of like sharing, getting to know you, getting to learn about one another, and then we don't do that again. At staff meetings, if you even have staff meetings, we don't allow time to create opportunities to get to know each other deeper. So part of that building community piece is really thinking about what does this look like on an ongoing level, not just at the beginning of a hiring cycle.
Yeah, I thought so. See that it's not at the beginning, and it's not only me as the leader who is doing that. That it becomes a community that does that together. And I think often it's like if I'm the one who starts that right at the beginning, sometimes everyone looks to you to do that rather than having everyone who's part of the community be able to move that. So if I'm off, for any period of time, that shouldn't fall apart. That should still be there, and still be people be able to move that.
Yeah, so I think even if we were to reframe kind of how we think about building community from a leadership perspective, we typically call that building community. But if we were just to shift the name of community building, then it's the community's responsibility, right? I'm going to do that. I'm changing it. It's now community building.
Okay, we're going to call it community building. That'd be great. Yeah. And then I think as part of that is sort of what you sort of align with that is like, how do you shift from managing results, like the things you want people to do, to actually letting them sort of manage and grow their strengths? Like, how do they are able to grow their strengths? So that's a great example of being able to do that, to give other people the opportunity to community build with you, rather than you being the one who has to take that leadership responsibility.
Yeah, and I just got off the phone this morning, and then I had another conversation earlier last week with two different leaders from two different states. So I had one in Arizona and one in California. And both of these people were asking me, how do I frame this conversation? I have a hard conversation that's coming up, and both of them use the same words around saying that I know that this staff is capable. I know that what we're dealing with is not a skill level, so something else is happening. And so it was really awesome to really be able to support these leaders because what they're having is they're engaging in conversations about growing their staff, and the conversation is not about the fact that certain things aren't getting done. It's not a management conversation. And so really thinking about how do we shift from managing to leading.
Okay. Yeah. And so then this sort of aligned with that is like creating an environment for feedback, so that there's this culture that develops where people can have difficult conversations, they can have celebration conversations, they can look at their work and see in each other what their strengths are or the areas to grow, and be able to support that with some real, like, honest feedback, rather than waiting to an end of a year where someone gets an evaluation on their performance, where, you know, I remember for me, like, one of my supervisors used to just come in and say, you know, you did a great job running groups, but they never came to see me run a group. And so it's like my feedback is based on what? So I think this culture of feedback based on like what we actually see, and also creating the opportunity for people to say, this is what I want you to come see. This is what I need feedback about. It's a really important part of this process.
And that's sometimes awkward. I remember I started out working my first full-time job as a youth worker that felt really professional. I had just finished my college kind of program, and I had to, they call them supervisory conferences. And I still have, we had to fill out a paper to prepare ourselves for the supervisory conference. I still have that paper because I remember thinking that someday I'm going to lead some people, and I'm going to have to learn how to have these conversations. I don't know how to frame them. But I hated filling out those papers. I hated going into those supervisory conferences. And it's a joke now. There was no reason. I mean, it's not a joke. The conferences were not a joke, but I'm slapping my own like insecurity, mostly because there were a couple of questions on there that I'd never really had to make time to reflect on. And the questions were around, like, you know, what supports do you need? Or what do you think is going well? What do you think your challenges are? And that didn't happen in my family. It didn't happen anywhere else. No one asked me, like, how I thought I was doing. And so it was always a little bit awkward. But I had a great supervisor who followed the form, and it was just the process. There was no need for me to be awkward. But sometimes feedback is not, or I should say, positive ways to provide and receive feedback is not something that we do in our culture. So creating that sense and building that in to our skill, not only to give but to receive feedback, is a huge, huge skill to kind of grow as a leader and learn more about.
Yeah. And then along with that comes accountability. So if I'm getting feedback, I'm also then accountable for what I do with that and how I move it. And you know, I think it's one of those things where you have to sort of set some goals around what it is you want to achieve and when you want to achieve them by, and and also find the right people to hold you accountable for that. It's either, because sometimes you can't do that yourself. You need some accountability within that. And as a manager or as a leader, how are you able to support your staff at the same time hold them accountable when they've asked you for feedback or they've set some goals and they want you to give them some feedback around that?
Yeah, and I think too around the accountability piece, for me, I think just as in the last, 15 years, maybe even 20 now, really thinking of the different teams that I've had opportunities to lead and the different professional development opportunities that I've had to either go to. Oftentimes organizations might say, Bob, go to this conference, it's going to be awesome, or some funding or some grant has paid for me to take a team to go. And so I go and I have this experience, and I might go to a few workshops, and they may or may not be helpful, and I may or may not implement any of the strategies I learned there. But when I come back to the agency, no one asks me to share the strategies or the lessons I've learned.
Right.
Typically, the conversation is very similar to our conversations when, like, you come home from a day of work. Like, how was the conference? How'd it go? How is it? And they don't really want to know. I mean, they might want to know, but for me, like, the accountability where I really kind of step up is if I now have to share that information, or there's some recognition that there was a lot of privilege to go and be the one to go and represent my agency or my team. And so what am I going to do with that information? How am I going to bring that back, not as a presentation to say, hey, all this cool stuff's happening, but as a conversation starter to say, what do we want to do with this? These are some of the trends in our field. These are some of the strategies that people are using. These are some of the challenges that people hear. We're not alone in this, and here's kind of some steps. What do we want to do? And that's the piece where I think being accountable to our own development, being accountable to trying new things and practicing skills, that's the part that's really fun, because then it's like you make great use of your time when you can see the impact you're actually having when you put it to use.
Yeah, we used to do it, I think when we went to trainings, is that we would actually think about before we even went to them, like what was going to be our course of action when we came home. And it wasn't related necessarily to training other people, but like, how was I going to share this with somebody?
Yeah.
How was I going to teach it to somebody? How could I ask some questions to learn more about what it was that I went to? Or how do I critique it? If it was, sometimes you go to conferences and you go to a workshop that you're not getting anything out of it, or it's not new. It's like, how do you still make that an experience that makes sense and you can learn from and move forward?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think these sort of leading with responsibility, like those are these 6 things that we try to identify are the core things that sort of set you on this path to sort of getting out of that hiring and firing cycle. It's, I think, starting with the beginning, what you want from people, what you want from yourself, how you're going to provide them with an opportunity to sort of provide feedback for each other and for you and themselves, I think becomes really important part of this process.
Yeah, and one of the things that one of the reasons why Nikki and I have really spent a lot of time doing this is because we want to share these strategies with you all, and we want to continue supporting a lot of the leaders that are out there to really know your skills and grow your skills. And that could be a bumper sticker.
I know, I like that one.
But really, we took a survey earlier, and a lot of people felt like people didn't get what they do as a leader. And they're like stuck in this hiring and then firing, or people are leaving. So it's like this transition with some of our teams, and so we just want to share these strategies with you all so you can avoid some of these pitfalls. We are putting together an opportunity for people to actually grow these skills in more depth. It'll be a 6-week kind of training, and we're going to put together a couple more videos. We just want to share some of the content that we're going to help people dive into before we actually do our training. So we want to invite you to sign up to get more information and resources and cool kind of strategies from us, from Shifting Norms. And you could do that by just adding your name and your email just next to this video.